again, is it instantaneous, or is it that I'm released and freed to be fully human now in such a way? I think the great example is, and Jesus makes an incredible pronouncement in this story, the famous story of Zacchaeus. Okay? He's a head tax collector, wealthy, Luke points out. You have to imagine what that means. That's like if we were under Nazi occupation and we had one of our own people being the guy that not only collects the taxes, but probably takes a little, gratuity on the side. He's definitely hated. He represents the Roman oppressive authority. And so on and so forth. Anyway, he wants to see who Jesus is. And we know the story. The crowd won't let him. He's short of stature, so he decides to run on ahead, climbs the sycamore tree. And Jesus, to his almost embarrassment, Jesus stops as he walks by. He stops right under the tree. It's like I can imagine everybody looking up at it, going, look, there's that crazy guy. What a bum, look at it, etc., up in the tree. Zacchaeus, come down quickly, Jesus says. I must stay at your house this day. Okay? Incredible statement. I'm coming in. And Jesus talks like, I'm coming to your house. As if it's his house. That's a whole other little idea about, like when Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock, he's knocking at his own house. Mm-hmm. We have to think of the parable of the people who are taking care of the household for the master. This is my house. But that's a whole other thing. Zacchaeus gets it. This isn't mine. And when he hears the people murmuring, he's going to go in to be the guest of a man who's this sinner, and I'm sure other epithets were thrown out. He turns and says, Lord, half my goods I give to the poor. Is that an ongoing activity? Is that what he's going to do, or is that something he's actually doing? Anyway, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give it 4 times over. And then Jesus turns and says, today, this day, salvation has come to this house. Earlier in Luke, John the Baptist talks about making restitution. In the Jewish mind, they understood it isn't just, that the symbol has to have an organic lifestyle reality connected to it. So, for example, physical intimacy reflected marriage. Physical intimacy was supposed to express and enhance what marriage meant. It wasn't the only action that took place in a marriage. Was it what distinguished marriage from any other relationship? Yes. But if that alone was it, so to understand the rituals and the symbols in that fashion, that it was to express and enhance the overall scheme of everything, not as a thing unto itself. Does that make sense? Okay, because I think the idea they would have understood, this means I'm free now to be, to do, mm-hmm. to release, to make restitution, to bring healing, as I'm receiving healing, etc., etc., etc. Because sin is understood, I've injured myself. I've injured myself. And in turn, my injury spills out to other people, and so forth.
Could I just get this straight? Are you saying that the pronouncement that was made for Zechariah,
Zacchaeus.
I'm sorry, for Zacchaeus, that Zacchaeus needed to hear that in order,
yes,
in order for that to become real in his life? And then it would have been the same with David, because David's not going back to Nathan. Nathan's coming to David then and saying,
it's Jesus who comes to Zacchaeus.
Yes.
And I think there's something about the pronouncement. I mean, we all know this. The times we feel, is there something, feel something's physically wrong. It's good to go to the doctor and hear you're really okay. But until you go to the doctor and it's pronounced that you're okay, you could be a nervous wreck. So even on that level, the pronouncements are important. Pronouncements are important. Of course, the pronouncement has to be connected to reality. It's not an arbitrary pronouncement. But that's why you are justified in your sentence and blameless. And when you judge, what it says in Psalm 51, God's judgments, God's diagnosis are not some arbitrary whim or, as if we had a doctor that all he cares about is us feeling good. So I'll tell you whatever you need to hear, type of thing, and so forth.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, one more.
When we ask God for forgiveness, Okay, and yet we sometimes still carry all that remorse and stuff around. If we are not willing to let it go, or I guess maybe we're saying we don't accept that God has forgiven us, I'm not sure, but is that showing that we have a lack of faith in God?
I think there's a such thing as healthy remorse. You know, it's like there's healthy and unhealthy shame.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy and unhealthy guilt. I think the healthy remorse is what would goad us to say, I don't want to fall back there again. Versus hating myself, condemning myself, dragging myself into the ground, and I'm no better than something that a worm defecates, okay, type of thing. That's not where God sees it, because self-centeredness can be also in that incredibly intense self-deprecating behavior, as much as somebody being totally arrogant and beating their chest as Tarzan. That could be just as, because so when we get that, we are ignoring God on one level. We can be ignoring God on one level. I think the idea, though, is there can be healthy remorse. It doesn't mean I'm not trusting God, but I also know my frailties. I have to know what my limitations are. You know, just like anybody that's in recovery from alcohol, drugs, right? They have to know what their limitations are. And for some of us, it's more than for others. It's very, and it doesn't. It's not a judgment about our worth or value as a human being. So the person that can't drink alcohol is no worse than the person that is able to and not be intoxicated all the time or whatever. It's what and that, I don't want to jump ahead, but one of the steps to growing in holiness in the early Christian understanding would be first learning my limitations. Actually, some of the rabbis talked about that too. Some of the rabbis would talk about, what are your limitations? First know those.
So you have to know yourself.
Yeah. I know Socrates was a nice Greek boy, but the idea of knowing who you are is very real in biblical understanding. We can't know the real God if we don't know really ourselves. Because knowing the real God will make us know ourselves, which in turn will help us know God more. Mm-hmm. But I have to know who the real me is, and not this personality or facade, this shell that I put up, and so on and so forth. And that means, and that's when we get ego-centered, and I mean ego-centered not in the sense of the ultimate I of who we are, but ego-centered in, you know, like somebody who is centered just in themselves, they're selfish, whatever. And as they say a lot of times in psychology, it's made up of our fears and our appetites, the appetites that actually try to assuage the fears. I'm afraid of this, I'm phobic of that, which ultimately boils down to I'm fearful God isn't there for me. God doesn't love me. And so forth. So, but that becomes the hypocrisia, the hypocrisy is the mask. Like, you know, many of you know this. The Greek word for hypocrite was the word that was used in ancient Greek theater to talk about the masks of the different personalities that you play, the different characters. That's not the real us. That's a facade. It's a facade. So Jesus is really talking about getting to the real us. God wants the real us. And what makes hell, quite in fact, is I won't accept the real me. I won't accept the real me. And God is saying, but this is who you are. No, it isn't. I'm da-da-da-da, and so forth. Great example is the night before Jesus dies with Peter. You know, one of you will betray me. Oh, not us, da-da-da-da-da, not me, not me, not me. No, one of you is going to do it. Well, Peter gets on his, you know, high horse and probably even stands up at the table and starts going, even if everybody else betrays you, not me, I'll go to prison for you. And if it needs be, I'll die for you. Peter, ain't happening tonight. Satan wants to sift you like wheat. I'm praying for you. So that when you return, because you're going to blow it, you will strengthen your brothers and sisters. Well, Peter couldn't accept that. And a few hours later, a rooster crows. So, I mean,
3 times.
Yeah. But the point being, did he, so then is there a healthy remorse to say, okay, that's not really where I was at. You know, my emotions, my passions were there, yes, but where the real me wasn't there yet. And Jesus could see that.